Well, good morning, everyone. This is George Spees for the Pennsylvania Office of Open Records. I'd like to welcome you here to this morning's webinar, where we're going to be discussing the right to know law and payment issues. This is always one of my favorite topics because of the level of misunderstanding when it comes to just how payment issues affect the right to know law. A lot of people think that the right to know law is free, and it's not. And there are a lot of tools available in the right to know law. And personally, I think one of the most powerful ones is the payment side of it for dealing with, let's just say, troublesome issues, which I'll get into here a little bit in the presentation. Pardon me, but a couple preliminaries as we're getting started here. First, the format is such that we have a PowerPoint up on the screen with me talking in the background. All of our PowerPoints that we use for our webinars are available on our website. You go to the training page, click on the tab, go down, and you'll find a listing of PowerPoints. You're welcome to download those for free and use those for future reference or your own training internally for your pardon me, for your organization. Also, this session is being recorded, and the recordings are available. If you, I believe it's set up now that they're on a cloud service. So if you're interested in a copy of the recording, you can send in an email to the staff, and I think they can set it up that you're provided with a link that would get you access. If I'm incorrect about that, the old system that works just as well is to send us a flash drive along with the self-addressed stamped return envelope and a note saying which recording you want, and turnaround's about a week with that, and that seems to work out fine. Okay. Using the chat feature, you can submit questions as we're going through the presentation. I'll do my best to answer them as we're going through. If it seems like we're dealing with something really odd that would require a somewhat complex response, or something very specific to your situation, we'll do one of two things. We'll wait until the end of the presentation and I'll come back to it, or we'll take the conversation offline. You can reach out to the office and they'll put you in touch with someone who will try and get you steered in the right direction. Oh, I apologize for this dry cough today. I'm suffering from some of the allergies that have been going around just like everybody else. And yeah, sorry about that. Okay, so all that being said, oh, wait a minute. One final point that I usually have to make here is that with your questions, I've got a favor to ask you. First offhand, keep them on point. We're here talking about the right to know law and payment issues. So if you can stick to that subject with your questions, I think that would be helpful for everybody. The second is that because of our time constraints and the fact that we have, a lot of people signed up here today, try to keep your questions brief. It's difficult for me to sit here and read, a couple sentences or paragraphs, and everybody patiently waiting, as I'm trying to figure out what someone is asking. So the shorter, the better. I hope you'll understand and that you can bear with us here. All right, so I think that takes care of all the preliminaries. Let's go ahead and dive into the topic. Okay. The payment side of the right to know law is primarily defined by Section 1307, which gives the Office of Open Records authorization to establish a fee schedule. It is posted on the website, and that fee schedule is revisited every 2 years, where through social media, we send out notices that, hey, we're looking at the fee schedule again. If you have any concerns or comments, please feel free to contribute. Usually that's like on Twitter, on the website, on the executive director's blog, and a couple other venues there. And using that information, those solicitations, um, the the fee schedule gets updated. Last time around, it was January in 2021. Okay, and based on comment, there were some changes made. Some fees went up, some fees went down, and just point being that we listen to what you say. Essentially, the fee schedule allows an agency to charge up to 25 cents a page, single-sided black and white, 8.5 by 11 or 8.5 by 14. Now, there was a provision added this last time around where if you're dealing with a really big response in excess of 1,000 pages, once you get above 1,000, the cost drops to 20 cents a page. Obviously, you're not going to encounter that a whole lot, but nevertheless, we run across it with like environmental studies, some DEP things, PennDOT right-of-way, and the like. And, there are some sizable responses there. If it's necessary to reproduce records in color, then it goes up to 50 cents a page, single-sided color, 8.5 by 11, 8.5 by 14. Any boy, any other sizes, then we're talking about the actual cost of what it would take to reproduce those records. Now, you'll note at the bottom I have there in bright red, read the footnotes, okay? When you look at the fee schedule, don't just read, the top listing of what we have there. Rather, go down to the fine print and go through those footnotes because, every policy, every procedure usually has an exception. The footnotes are where you're going to find those exceptions to the fee schedule. And it will also detail certain scenarios that may come up where, this just doesn't seem like the fee schedule applies here. Well, chances are someone has encountered that scenario before, and you'll find it kind of explained out in those footnotes on the fee schedule. So yeah, I recommend that you take a look at that. Okay. Now, in addition to the fee schedule, you are allowed to charge what are called pass-through costs. Now, a pass-through cost is any actual cost that would be incurred and can be documented, and then you can pass that on to the requester. The most common example would be postage. Let's say the scenario is such that someone submits a right to know request and they want hard copy records generated. So you make your copies and you're charging the up to 25 cents a page for those. And the requester also would like all of the copies mailed to them through the postal service. Well, you can take all your copies, put them on your postal meter. It says, it's going to cost, let's say, $3.15 to mail these to the requester. Well, you can add that $3.15 onto your invoice because that is an actual documented cost. Another example would be blueprints. Okay, let's say you get a request for a copy of a blueprint that represents a public record. You don't have a large-scale copier available. So the only solution is to go down to Staples or Kinko's or maybe your local architectural firm, have them print out a copy of the blueprint for you. And usually it's like 18 by 20, 18 by 24, whatever, sometimes larger. And they're going to charge you, let's say $10 a sheet. All right. Well, there is, again, a documented cost where you have received a charge for reproducing a copy of a public record, and thus you can pass that cost on to the requester for the price of the copy of the blueprint. Okay. An example that we used to get that I haven't seen probably in a couple of years and might be worth it to take this off is where someone has requested a recording, usually of a public meeting. Okay, and nowadays, someone will use like a cell phone or a laptop, or maybe they have one of those little digital handheld recorders. But we still find instances where some of the smaller municipalities are using cassette recorders or the micro cassettes. And the only way that they can produce a copy then of the recording is to, make another analog recording of the cassette. Well, when that occurs, you can't find dual cassette decks anymore, much less even single cassette decks. Even worse for micro cassettes. But sometimes you go to like an audio store or a sound studio or someplace like that, and they do have the equipment to make a copy of a cassette tape. Well, in addition to charging for the cassette itself, the blank, they're going to charge labor. And again, that would be a documented cost where the agency has received an invoice and they can pass that invoice cost on to the requester. All right. Now, like I said, I haven't seen this in a couple years because everyone's moved to digital, but nevertheless. And then finally, sometimes you receive a request for electronic files, and because of the size of the files, they cannot be transmitted by email, or you don't have a DVD drive anymore. The typical solution nowadays, and we were using this at the Office of Open Records up until a little while ago, is for a flash drive. Well, many agencies will have a supply of flash drives that they use. It's simple to copy to the flash drive and then mail the flash drive out, or however you're going to transmit it to the requester. You can charge for the cost of that blank flash drive. Now, I've got a solution for that we need to talk about. I think it might be the next slide. But again, these are examples of what are known as pass-through costs. And the whole point of a pass-through cost is that you can pass those actual charges onto the requester as part of the invoicing process. I mentioned I was going to talk about flash drives. Here we are. And this is what we consider to be a best practice. Oh, can we charge for staff time to make copies? No, you cannot. Under the right to know law, you are not allowed to charge for labor. All right. You can only charge for the copies of the records and these pass-through costs that we're talking about. Now, I will go off script here and say that periodically there have been proposals in the legislature that would allow an agency to charge an hourly rate for responding to commercial requests. These are where you have a business using the right to know law to obtain records that they're going to turn around and sell. Obviously, when the right to know law was written, and I know the people who wrote the law, and I've had this conversation, no one envisioned that you would have these commercial requesters. It just wasn't on the radar screen. So it has been probably the most vocal concern of municipalities about being able to charge staff time. All I'll say is that with these proposals, some of them have gained some traction, but never been passed, never became law. There is a proposal right now in the legislature that is being considered that would allow charging an hourly rate. If you feel strongly about it, I would suggest that you contact your legislator and let them know that you believe they should support this provision to revise the right to know law. Our office is supportive of the proposal. And, but until that happens, you cannot charge for your labor. Okay, back to the sidebar here with flash drives. We used to go out and do a lot of live training, and we still have contact with a lot of municipalities. And one of the suggestions that was made was that what we do speaking as a municipality, is that when someone requests electronic records and the files are too large to be emailed, we require that they send us an unopened flash drive, which we will then copy the files to and return them. That way, we don't have to keep a supply of flash drives and we don't have to go through the whole invoicing process, which, is inconvenient and takes a lot of time. The other thing that they do is before copying the files, they would put them on a self-standing computer, like let's say a laptop, and unhook it from the computer network that the municipality has. That way, there's no fear of any sort of virus being transmitted from the flash drive. So two things: the flash drive would be unopened, and the computer that the files are being copied from would be unhooked from the network, so that if there is the potential for a virus, the virus software picks it up, or there's any fear of it going to the computer network and all the IT people going crazy. Okay, now there's absolutely no requirement and no language at all in the right to know law that covers this. But we're putting it out there because a number of municipalities have adopted this practice and it works out for them. Okay, it seems to be successful. So we've identified it as a best practice, something for you to consider next time you receive a request that requires a large response for electronic records. Okay, what can you not charge for? Well, we mentioned, due to the question that was received, you cannot charge for labor, whether it be an hourly or a fixed fee. And we will still run across agency websites where, they detail their right to know program, and, you'll see all responses are going to cost $20. Well, no, you cannot do that. That would be a fixed fee that is inconsistent with the language of the right to know law, as well as the fee schedule that the Office of Open Records has statutorily established. You cannot charge for any sort of legal review, meaning you've received a request and before you send out a response, you want either your solicitor or some sort of outside counsel to review it to make sure you're not giving out anything you're not supposed to give out. Unfortunately, that's just considered the cost of doing government business as it applies to the right to know law, and you have to absorb those costs. Like I said, you cannot charge a processing fee. You can't charge a redaction fee. Yeah, I still find these around every now and then where the website says, look, if we have to redact anything from the records that we're going to provide, we're going to tack on an extra $5 to the response. Okay, you cannot do that. Again, that would be inconsistent with the right to know law. Okay, question has popped up here. Sorry. We have had requests that produce 20,000 emails per one request. This requires solicitor fees, IT fees to get ready, which, 20 to 25 hours. Is it law that we have to release these emails for free? Can we opt to release the information by paper and charge the paper fees? No. And I'll get to this when we talk about Section 701, but basically, if the records are in electronic medium, then that is how you have to release them. You do not have the option of saying we're going to print these out so that we can charge you up to 25 cents a page. Honestly, you're not going to make any money by charging for the paper anyway. I mean, when it comes out to calculating your time and the effort and, actually the cost of wear and tear on your copying devices, no one's making any money charging 25 cents a page. I think, really the only intent of that would be to try and throw cold water on the requester, and that's just not going to work. Okay, so the short answer is no. You cannot charge. You do not have the option of printing out electronic records uh, in order to affect a charge that otherwise would not exist. Okay, you can't charge for scanning. Okay, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, but if you have to scan records in order to make them electronic, you cannot charge for the exercise of scanning. Interestingly, there's probably a good chance that you don't have to scan the records in the first place. And no, you cannot charge for the electricity that you use in order to produce copies. You're thinking, okay, where's this coming from? I've actually received this question twice. And usually it was in the middle of arguments between the requester and the agency, where the agency said, well, all right, we'll charge you for the electricity. No, you cannot. All right. Okay, Stacy, some of these requests are from the same people. Just thought it would reduce the number of requests. Stacy, we'll talk about this. Okay, we'll get to this topic, and hopefully I can provide you with some helpful information here. So you cannot charge for electronic records such as emails, Word documents, Excel spreadsheets, or various database files. Now, if there is a dispute over the fees, let's say that you assess a fee to the requester for the response you're providing, and the requester balks at it, they do have the right to appeal. And I'll just leave it at that. If you want to see appeals where the fees have been the matter of dispute, you can go to our website, go to the docket search tool under appeals, and just type in the word fees in the random text string, and all of the appeals that we have ruled on where there was a dispute over fees will come up, and it'll give you a pretty good background on where our office has stood at this. Okay, another question's popped up. If you need to have a third party scan the document, is that considered a documented cost? Oh boy, that's a good question. I'm not sure what kind of scenario you would have a third party scanning a record for you. Um, but again, and I promise you, I'm going to get to this. It may not be necessary that you have to scan the record. Okay, and we'll take a look at the various scenarios here. And again, this is a common misunderstanding where you think you have to scan a record in order to provide it to the requester, and there's a good chance you don't have to. I think if you have a third party doing it, if it is a valid reason as to why you have to scan the record, there's a good shot that you could pass that cost on to the requester. But, I think you'd have to have a pretty good legal case for actually having to do the scanning. Huh. Interesting. That one's never come up before. Okay. Oh, you're explaining it. We were unable to scan in the office. The requester only wanted electronic copies, and we didn't have them electronically. Okay, I'm going to go on a limb here and say that you probably didn't have to scan the records in the first place. So the cost, I would argue that the cost was probably unnecessary, and you probably could not have charged it. It just depends. But I promise you, we're going to get to that. You guys are on the edges of talking about a very important tool in the right to know law. Okay. Oh, and here we are. Section 701, which deals with medium. Now, I'm going to paraphrase here, but essentially what Section 701 of the right to know law says is that the record is only provided in the medium in which it exists. So, let's try and convert this into English. What does this mean? Well, it's hard copy versus electronic. So from a practical perspective, the agency is only required to provide a record in hard copy if that's how they have the record in their possession. Meaning that if, let me use an example here. Let's talk about building permits. Let's say that the municipality has a building permit process that's all paper driven. I want a building permit, so I fill out my forms and submit all of my paperwork hard copy to the municipality. All right, it goes to the building codes department. They review it, and they issue a building permit that is also a hard copy record. Now, everything associated with the building permitting process, they're kept in file folders in a file cabinet. There are no electronic copies of this transaction. So someone turns around and submits a right to know request electronically, and they say, I would like copies of building permits, and I want them sent to me electronically. And they do that for two reasons. First, it's convenient. Second, there's no charge for electronic records. But wait a minute, we only have copies of the building permits in hard copy. Well, based on this language in section 701, you are not required to scan in the building permits because that would be converting them from hard copy medium to electronic medium. And based on this language in section 701, you do not have to do that. And then going back to the original question about printing out emails, well, that would be converting them from electronic to hard copy. And again, you do not have to do that. Now, as far as scanning them in, sorry, you can scan them in if you want to, because sometimes it's more convenient to do so. But you cannot charge for those electronic records. Okay, so you have the option of scanning, but again, there is no charge for electronic records. Now, let's talk about format, okay, because that is something different than medium. And the most common example here would be an Excel spreadsheet. And this is an evolving area of case law related to the right to know law, so bear with me here while I explain. It used to be that if I submitted a right to know request for a copy of an Excel spreadsheet, and let's say you had concerns about providing me with the Excel spreadsheet, because then I would be able to see the formulas that make up each cell, and maybe you were worried about me somehow altering those formulas to misrepresent the spreadsheet, you could provide me with a PDF copy, an electronic PDF copy of the spreadsheet. And legally, that would be okay because the law says you provide a copy, okay? And PDF is a copy. It's basically a snapshot of the spreadsheet. Now, the law has evolved somewhat, where now, if I request a copy of the Excel spreadsheet, and I specify that I want the Excel spreadsheet, then that's what you have to provide. If I only say I want a copy of the spreadsheet, then you could get away or attempt to get away with just the PDF. Now, I will also say that I am not aware of anyone ever altering and misrepresenting an Excel spreadsheet once they receive one. Okay, it's one of those what if arguments that never really came to fruition. So by providing the actual Excel spreadsheet, no harm, no fear there. Go ahead and do that. But if the question comes up, what if we want to provide a PDF? That's where the law currently is. Okay, and then occasionally you'll run across some proprietary formats, and these are where I've run across it twice, police departments and some school districts, where for record-keeping purposes, they have purchased a proprietary package that cannot be converted to what would commonly be what a requester would commonly have. Like you cannot make a CSV file or an ASCII file or text file or anything like that. and there's no way to print out hard copies. In those instances, the agencies were able to say, we cannot grant your request because these records only exist in a proprietary format, and we're not required to, go out and purchase any software that would allow converting them. Like I said, I've only run across it with police departments for incident reporting and some school districts that had some, fairly complex software issues. Also, this has come up periodically, QuickBooks. If you're using QuickBooks as your financial record-keeping platform, every now and then, someone will request a backup copy of QuickBooks itself from the municipality so that they can read certain QuickBooks reports. No, it turns out, QuickBooks has said, as part of their purchasing agreement, our software is proprietary. You cannot give out backup copies. Based on that language, you can deny the request to give out proprietary software, which you should be doing anyway. Okay, so I hope that explains it. Electronic versus hard copy, you do not need to convert one to the other. No scanning, no printing, unless you already have the records in your possession in electronic medium or hard copy medium, and that's the way the people are requesting it. Okay, redaction costs. This comes up fairly often, and let me explain. You've determined that you're going to provide a public record, but on this record, there is some sensitive piece of data that you want to black out. Okay, that is known as redaction. Okay, and it could be something like, a home phone number, a personal email address, a social security number, anything that would otherwise be considered a non-public piece of information. So let's say that we're dealing with a hard copy record. Well, hard copy record, you would simply, take your Sharpie or your whiteout and cover it over and send it on its way, okay? However, let's say you're dealing with an electronic record. Well, there are two ways to redact. The first is perhaps you have Adobe Office Suite with its redaction tool. That has a secure way to go in and black out the sensitive piece of data. And because it is remaining as an electronic record throughout this entire process, there's no cost for that electronic redaction. However, let's say you don't have Adobe Office Suite, and the only way you can redact the electronic record is to print it out, then take your Sharpie or whiteout or whatever, black out the sensitive piece of information, and then scan it back in to maintain the electronic medium. In that instance, you can charge for the piece of paper that you had to generate in order to effect the manual redaction. Now, if you have the redaction software, you should use it. However, notice I'm saying should and not shall. There is currently nothing in the right to know law or current case law that requires you to use electronic redaction software if you have it. So you do have the option of affecting the manual transaction or the manual redaction if you want to. And because you're doing the manual redaction, you could charge for it. Okay. This could also have an impact on inspection requests. If you're familiar with the right to know law, you know that a requester can request copies or they can request to come into the office and actually inspect the record. Usually, you would think there's no charge for an inspection. However, if you're allowing the person to see a public record, but you have to redact that sensitive piece of information, you can charge up to 25 cents a page because you had to make that redaction. It's just that in this particular scenario, make sure that the person is able to walk out with that piece of paper that you're charging them for, because, it's only fair that you would do that. The other thing that I recommend when it comes to charges for redactions is that this is an area where people usually are not expecting to receive a charge for. So if it looks like you're going to be doing redactions, call up the person or send them an email before you dive into this and let them know that several of these records are going to require redactions and there's going to be a charge for them. Are you willing to pay that fee? That way, there's no surprise when it comes to them getting the charge. Plus, if they balk at the idea of paying for redactions, you're aware of that and they withdraw their request before you start working on the response, and you can save yourselves a lot of time that way. Okay, we have had requests for tax records. The information contains names, address, tax fees. Can we release their name and address because the company requesting it is contacting these people to do business? It seems like sensitive information. Okay, Stacy, under the Pennsylvania Revenue Code, tax records are not subject to the right to know law. When they're in possession of the tax collector, if the tax collector has provided the records to the municipality, then it's possible that the municipality would provide these tax records. The name and address and the tax fees usually are considered public records. However, if you're talking about a commercial requester, I think you need to take a look at what we were just talking about with Section 701 and what medium you have those records. Because if they are paper, usually these commercial requesters are asking you to put them in their spreadsheet electronically because there's no fee. So go back to what I was talking about there with you don't have to scan them in, you don't have to enter them into a spreadsheet because that would be converting them from one medium to another, and that might solve your problem. Okay? All right, let's move on from redactions and talk about actually charging fees. How does this work? Well, the right to know law doesn't really address fees. If you look at the language with all of the deadlines, it's for providing the response, not the records. And the law also says that all applicable fees shall be paid in order to receive access to the records requested. Okay, so notice it's not saying, well, let me back up here. What it is saying is that the person pays first and then they get the records. Okay? Now, ideally, it's a mutual exchange. Here's the money, here's the records, and everyone's fine with that. But when push comes to shove, you receive payment first, then you get the records. Now, what about all the deadlines in the law? Again, like I said, the deadlines refer to the response, not when the records are provided. So you can get a request, and within 5 business days, or maybe your 30 calendar days, if you take an extension, you provide the response. We are granting your request. And then you can say, we'll provide you with the records when we receive payment and your payment clears. Okay, and that can be beyond the 5 business days or the 30 calendar days, because the law says the deadlines apply to the response, not the actual provision of the records. I hope you see that difference that I'm trying to highlight here. So running through a scenario, you receive a right to know request. First thing you need to take a look at is, will our response exceed $100 in cost? because there is a provision dealing with prepayment, Section 1307, where if it looks like the response is going to cost more than $100, you can demand a check up front. And I like to refer to this as a security deposit. And it's in the law to make sure that the agency doesn't get stiffed for a big response and then the person balks at payment. So you get their money, their check, up front, an estimate of what you think it's going to cost in excess of $100. And then you settle up on the exact amount when it comes time to actually provide the records that you've granted. Okay, and then you grant the request within the prescribed deadlines. And like I said, depending on the circumstances, it could be within the 5 business days. It could be within the 30 calendar days if you took the extension. Okay, so you send out a letter. Like I said, we're granting your request. It's going to cost, let's just say $30 in this instance. It's going to cost $30. Send us a check, and when the check clears, we'll provide you with the records. So you process payment, and then you arrange to provide the records. And it could be, the person's going to come into the office and pick them up. It could be we're going to mail them out, however you want to do it. But once they've paid and the payment is cleared, you've previously granted the request, but now you're providing the actual records. And that provision of the records is not subject to any deadline requirements within the right to know law. It's only considered to be, what we'll call a reasonable period of time, which is subjective, and we take it on faith that the agency is not going to abuse that lack of language, and they will provide them within a reasonable period of time. All right, so that's how all of that works. Now, there's another scenario within the right to know law. It's called record discard. And, we run across this periodically. So let me map out the scenario. The request has been granted, and it's all for hard copy records. And the requester has said, and the agency has agreed, look, I'll stop by and pick them up at the Borough Hall or the Township Building or the School District Administration Building, and I'll pay for them then. Okay, well, that sounds good. That's workable. We'll agree to that. All right, well, under this provision of the right to know law, the agency has 60 calendar days that they have to hold on to the records. If after 60 calendar days, basically 2 months, if after 2 months, if this person hasn't shown up to pick up the records, the agency can dispose of the records. You can shred them, you can recycle them, you can throw them in the trash, whatever it is you want to do, because the agency has met its legal obligation with everything that it's done up to that point. And it's not their fault that the person hasn't shown up to pick up the records. But let's say, just for purposes of argument, on the 61st day that the person does show up. Hey, I'm here to pick up my records. Well, they're out of luck. And they're out of luck on a couple different levels here. First offhand, even though the agency destroyed the records, the person still owes the money because, like I said, the agency did everything it was legally required to do. So if it's, just for purposes of argument, a $30 charge, they still owe you that $30. And let's say they still want the records. Well, they have to submit a second right to know request. And there's probably going to be a charge, another $30 for the second request. But the agency doesn't have to process the second request until the first $30, the first request, is paid for. And let's say they don't even want the records anymore, but they want an entirely different set of records. So they submit a second right to know request. The agency does not have to process any more right to know requests as long as there is an outstanding debt. So until that first $30 is paid, that person's out of luck. Now, there's no statute of limitations on this. It doesn't go away after a month. It doesn't go away after a year. It doesn't go away after 5 years. And the right to know law doesn't have any language related to what your collection activities are. So, however you collect other outstanding fees, you can apply that to your right to know law process. However, keep in mind that denying a subsequent request because there are outstanding fees is a denial, and it can be appealed. So just make sure all your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed relative to all communication that you've had with the requester, to how you calculated the fees, to make sure everything is above board. Because if that person chooses to file an appeal, the appeals officer is going to want to see all that paperwork. And as long as everything's in order, there's a pretty good chance they're going to agree with you and rule in your favor, in the agency's favor, that yes, there are outstanding fees. And until that debt is settled, until that account is no longer in arrears, you don't have to process any further right to know requests. Okay? Okay, no surprises. I've kind of hinted at this, but I just want to emphasize it. Communication between the requester and the agency is a good thing. It can save you a lot of headaches, and it can save you a lot of work by having a dialogue back and forth with what the requester is asking for and what the agency has and what the rules are. Okay, now a requester, when they submit a right to know request, they can specify a limit. They can put on a statement that says something to the effect that, look, if it appears that this response is going to cost more than $10, give me a call first, okay, so that we can talk about it. Or the agency, when they receive a request, they can do a quick estimate. Nothing wrong with sending out an email or a phone call saying, look, we think the response is going to cost around $30. Are you okay with that? And they may balk at it. They may say, no, no way, I'm going to pay $30. I'm withdrawing my request. That way, you haven't done a bunch of work that you wouldn't have had to do, and you're not getting stiffed for non-payment of the response. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that under the right to know law, you cannot compel a person to tell you why they are filing a right to know request. But the law doesn't say that you can't ask. So sometimes if you get a request that's somewhat confusing, or maybe it seems unduly burdensome, very large, you can call up the requester and say, look, you mind telling me why you're asking for these records? Because I want to help you out here. Might be able to save you some money. And from your perspective, you might be able to save yourself a lot of time and work by simply having this conversation with the requester. And, if they get the sense that you're on their side, that you're trying to save each other, time and money, they'll probably agree, and they'll probably tell you why they are filing. And like I said, it could end up being a win-win for everybody. So you can ask the question. It's just that you cannot force them to tell you why. Communication between the parties is a good thing. All right, certified records. This comes up periodically. So let's talk about this. The right to know law allows you or allows the requester to specify that they want the response to be certified. A certified response or certification, all it's saying is that the agency is providing true and correct copies of the originals. Certification is not in any certifying the provenance of the records, similar to like a police department with chain of custody. You're not saying that what's on the record is true. Rather, you're only saying it is a true and correct copy. And it's what we call self-authenticating. Okay. So on our website in the agency open records officer guidebook, we actually provide you with sample language for a certification. And when you issue a certification, you can charge an additional $5 for that document that's certifying the records are true and correct. Okay, so the example language is there. Transcripts, okay? this is an interesting scenario. We get questions about it periodically, but you go to section 707C of the Right to Know law, and it kind of details how this all works out. If you're part of an environmental hearing board, maybe a zoning hearing board, you have adversarial settings. You have these hearings where, based on language in those specific laws, you have um, a stenographer present during these adversarial hearings. And they are taking verbatim dictation and producing a transcript of the hearing. Okay, the way this works under the Right to Know law is that two criteria need to be met for the Right to Know law to apply and the Right to Know fee schedule to apply. First is that all, pardon me, all appeals need to be exhausted, meaning that, let's say the zoning hearing board ruled against the application. Well, depending on the circumstances, there are various appeals that the person can go up through the court system. Until all those appeals have been exhausted, the Right to Know law does not apply. Rather, the person requesting the transcript would have to go to the stenographer and pay whatever fees the stenographer is charging. And usually it's a lot more than the up to 25 cents a page. Usually it's a couple dollars a page. The second condition is that the municipality or the agency, maybe it's the zoning hearing board, needs to have a copy of the transcript in its possession, because sometimes they don't bother paying for the transcript. Rather, they'll pay the stenographer fees, usually it's a flat rate, but they will not pay for a copy of the transcript that the stenographer will archive in their own records. So two conditions: all appeals need to be exhausted, and the agency must have possession. Then someone can file a right to know request, and they would only pay the up to 25 cents a page. Now, occasionally we'll hear of stenographers balking at that, and they'll say, look, my contract says that for a copy of the transcript, you have to pay me. We have ruled that if the municipality has received a copy of the transcript, then that is a public record, and under the Right to Know law, it's only up to 25 cents a page. And that has been, our practice since the Right to Know law was established in 2009, so it stands as law at this point. Okay, so that's how it works with transcripts. All right, so we are at the end of the presentation. If you have any further questions, now's the time to get them in. Or if something comes up after we end the presentation, feel free to contact the office and they'll try to get you steered in the right direction. But I would also encourage you to take a look at the website with the Office of Open Records. It is an excellent resource where you can look at the citizens guides, the agency guides. I mentioned the final determinations database, the docket tool, where you can go in and search decisions, over 30,000 decisions. Chances are they've covered whatever you've encountered with your particular situation. But feel free to email in or call the office, and like I said, they'll get you steered in the right direction with your questions. I'd like to thank you for your participation today. In 2 weeks, we will be doing the Right to Know law as it applies to law enforcement. It's a good topic for if you're involved with law enforcement, or if not, just as general information. We go into a little more detail on what police departments can expect when dealing with the Right to Know law. Okay, so I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and have a good week. We're going to sign off now, and take care.